I guess we'll go ahead and start the evening. So thank you so much for coming. This is the second year of the Winter Dressage Lecture Series, and the purpose of this is to just do something fun in January and February when it's cold and maybe we don't feel like riding quite as much, but we want to do something that is, social, dressage-oriented, educational, and in a beautiful home. So we want to thank Kathy so much for, again, hosting at her beautiful clubhouse. I love this place, and it's really fun to come here. So the topic tonight, as you know, is your brain on dressage. What can sports psychology teach us about dressage? And this topic is really near and dear to my heart because competing in dressage did not come naturally to me. In fact, I struggled quite a lot in the beginning. I began horse showing as an adult, even though I've ridden since I was 8 and I've been a professional rider and trainer since I was 23. This lecture is not just about competing, though. It's about what sports psychology can tell us about the actual practice of dressage, the learning, the goals, the stress, the focus. Whether we show our horses or not, forming a deliberate practice and understanding our own mental strengths and weaknesses can make our riding that much more rewarding and our time spent dedicated to learning that much more productive. I have earned my USDF, United States Dressage Foundation, Diamond Achievement Award, which means that I have all of my USDF medals and freestyle bars from first level through Grand Prix. I'm proud of this, and it means a lot to me. Professionally, these awards are like certificates of competency and markers of experience. However, they also make me feel like I've just gone to a lot of horse shows. This year will be my 10th year competing at the FEI level. I remember one particular show. I think it was in the fall, and it was the last show of the year. My Grand Prix horse was getting older, and I was feeling keenly the limited time that we had to earn our respective awards. It felt very important, these awards, because I was struggling to establish myself as a rider and trainer in this new large fish pond of dressage, which is the East Coast, because I'm originally from Oregon. So basically, I was feeling a lot of pressure to make the most out of this last show of the year on my older horse. I don't remember all the details, but I'm pretty sure I made a mistake, of course, which means that you turned right when you needed to turn left, and the score did not reach the required benchmark. I'm not proud to say that I cried for 45 minutes in total frustration in the tack room of my trailer after taking care of my horse, of course. I was a nervous wreck at shows. I was making mistakes that were very preventable, that didn't have anything to do with my skill level, and I wasn't handling failure very gracefully. When I first started showing, I would get an upset stomach 4 days before the show, unable to eat properly. I blame most of this on my artistic parents, who were not supportive of organized sports. They were as supportive as they could be about my love of horses, but they didn't do much to shepherd me into any group activities and competition, aside from 4-H archery, which I did do for years. But even that is a relatively solo sport, and in our very rural area, they held only a couple of archery shoots per year. I liked riding my horse, alone, with a friend, and that was pretty much it. The things we did, like herding cattle or starting colts, were hardly competitive. There was a strong focus on functional skills like those, and in simply loving our horses. So back to crying in the tack room after my Grand Prix test. I had brought my horse to the highest level of training, but when it came to the show ring, I needed help managing myself in order to show our good work. I needed help understanding why I had such terrible competition nerves, why I felt so much pressure, and how to fix the simple but costly mistakes that I kept making in the ring. I turned to the field of sports and performance psychology, and over the past 8 years, I've read countless books, listened to hundreds of interviews, and completed a course with Olympic-level coaches. I'm clearly not a psychologist, but I want to share with you the personal skills that made a profound difference in my performance and scores, and more importantly, with my mental relationship to practice and learning. These studies for me were truly life-changing. My scores in the show ring went up by 10 points, and my anxiety became manageable. I want to emphasize that what I'm sharing with you tonight is not really about competition itself. Dressage is an art, but we've made it a sport since 1912 when it became part of the Olympics. It hasn't always been judged, and it doesn't need to be. The joy of dressage is always about connecting with our horse and the deep opportunities for growth it offers us when we put ourselves in relationship with a being that does not share our verbal language. So tonight, we'll touch on 3 topics: insights into learning and teaching, breathwork and awareness, and goals, reframing failure, and preparation. In the first section, talking about learning and teaching, I'll tell some personal stories about my own experience as a student and how it changed my teaching as a result. In the second section, about awareness and breathwork, we'll talk about some concrete skills and points of reference for managing stress and anxiety and improving focus. In the third section, we'll turn to some of the frameworks of sports and performance psychology that helped me the most. Sound good? Okay, so jumping right into our first section. First, we'll talk about learning, and then we'll talk about teaching. And of course, we'll have a question and answer period at the end of the lecture. Have you ever heard the saying, every strength is also a liability? Well, I certainly feel like that applies to me. I've always had a quick mind, pretty good body awareness, and I like learning. I put a lot of effort into my practice, and I retain a lot of what I read. It seems like possibly a good recipe for a rider. Well, not exactly. To quote a fellow dressage teacher, to learn to ride dressage, it helps to be a little bit dumb. What she meant was that dressage can get so cerebral and detail-oriented that it's like quicksand. You get pulled in deeply, but your actual riding skills get nowhere. I have certainly fallen into this trap of being overly cerebral in my approach to riding. In order to improve my performances, I had to look at my own mental and emotional habits. These biases about our own learning are deep and often unconscious. The very things that I thought made me a good learner were actually roadblocks to my own progress. Let's take a moment to look at how riding affects the rider in general. Physically, we have the challenge of balancing on the horse and moving with the horse through space at some speed. Our muscles are working, our heart rate might be coming up, and with it, the rate of our respiration. We're thinking about what we're doing. How are my hips moving? Are my shoulders back? My abs are burning? We're aware of how our riding clothes and our boots feel, our horse's mood. We're analyzing the gaits and the contact, how we're executing a certain movement, and maybe on top of all of that, we're listening to what our instructor is saying. Riding has so much sensory input, and when you add emotional input, it can feel overwhelming. Sometimes the emotional level changes when we have to try harder. There is a relationship between physical effort and mental state. This might sound familiar. You can't lift the heavy hay bale? Just get mad about it and try again. But when we're on our horse, we have to be very careful with shifting emotional states. Both horse and rider have to work hard, but work calm. Working hard but working calm might seem obvious, but the implications are not. When we start to make a greater effort and we get outside our comfort zone, we can get flustered, or I call it activated. In psychological terms, it's called being aroused. We can even get overwhelmed. When we flood with emotions, we have much less awareness of our body, and our ability to process unfolding events is greatly diminished. If you get upset, it can take 20 minutes for your cortisol levels to drop back to normal. 20 minutes, it's a long time. For now, I don't think it's said often enough that a huge part of learning to ride and train is sorting through the emotions and sensations to find the ones that are correct and that actually matter, internally and externally. There's a lot of noise and static in the art of riding. So as we're wading through the sea of information and sensation that is dressage, we have to learn to ignore and what to pay attention to. Have you ever been so focused on your riding that later you found out you had a rub somewhere? A blister on your heel or inside your knee, or maybe you focus so much on contact you couldn't feel the horse's hind end, or maybe every time you tried to engage your horse's hind end, they leaned into your hand and then all you thought about was contact again. The teacher's role is to help the student focus on the most important sensations out of everything that's going on, and to guide the rider's brain and body on the most productive path. It might not be what you expect, and our own biases can creep quietly in and obscure the salient points, especially now when the amount of information available to us on every kind of topic related to dressage is exactly like drinking from a fire hose. Sometimes I read things on Facebook and I wonder, how would a novice ever sort through what's actually relevant and productive on here versus what just sounds authoritative or strokes the assumptions that a person already has about dressage? How would they know that the person posting is describing an exercise that sounds really good, but later might actually cause a problem? Do we even know the level of expertise of this author? We naturally gravitate towards messages we already agree with, which is called confirmation bias. This is a really important and subtle concept that I think everyone should be aware with. So it's that we unconsciously gravitate towards what we already know and agree with. We can even twist an instructor's lesson into something we agree with when in fact they were trying to send us a different message. But maybe it's one that makes us uncomfortable or it's not what we expected. Early on in my dressage career, I was diligent about reading the classical masters and digesting theory and history. I would read about a movement and decide it must feel a certain way, only to find that in real life on the horse, it was totally different from how I had imagined. This is what Nuno Oliveira meant when he said, books are for people who already know how to ride. Given our deeply subjective experiences of being in our own bodies, plus our own natural crookednesses and our confirmation bias that pushes us to embrace what's already familiar, it's highly unlikely that anyone would learn to ride from a book or Facebook. And to that end, now that I'm a fairly competent rider, when I went back and read a favorite old book of body awarenesses for exercises for riding recently, I was surprised to find most of them to actually be slightly misleading and not applicable to dressage itself. In the years-long process of learning about riding, I had to let go a lot of the assumptions that I had formed from reading and playing to my own strengths and interests. I wanted to be a good student by understanding theory, and I went through a phase where I was thinking about theory while I was riding. This wasn't helpful because I was pulling precious resources of attention away from my horse. My reactions were slower, and I was essentially distracting myself. Riding only happens in the present moment, and I wasn't fully present in my body when I was thinking about Steinbrecht. Theory is for after riding, my teacher would tell me. Just ride now. You should be so focused on what's happening right now that you can't think about anything else. He was also fond of saying, how can you ride when you're talking so much? And my favorite, if your mouth is open, you're not learning.
If your mouth is open?
Yeah. Because you're talking.
Okay.
It could be just because we're breathing really hard. That doesn't count. You could still be learning. At first, I was offended. Did my mental processes not matter? Wasn't this a partnership between teacher and rider? Didn't we need to discuss everything to make sure I had it right? It was only much later that I realized that when I wanted to talk after a breakthrough, I was railroading right over the most important thing. The delicate epiphanies and new neural pathways being formed when you finally get something right. This is something I want to emphasize as important in the way that we learn. This idea of letting the breakthrough soak in, of not immediately layering our own biases and interpretations over it, but trying to figure out what was the instructor really trying to get me to do, and what did I do when it happened? Maybe it was something entirely different from what I assumed was going to happen or what I thought I needed. These little moments of success are really important to savor. We as riders work so hard to get our bodies to try something different, to make a small but important change in the way we influence the horse. When we get a glimpse of the right action or solution, sometimes it's like seeing through a frosty window or noticing something in your peripheral vision. It's fleeting, it's slight, it's subtle, and we need to work hard to capture that and to hold it in the body. That's why it's important not to verbalize or celebrate or even minimize right over the good moments and then lose their essence. I used to be guilty of not really recognizing the importance of the epiphany because one, maybe I was eager to get onto the full expression of the movement instead of focusing on this little piece, or two, I just was interested in the next trick. I would have that aha moment, and then I would arrogantly think, well, I have that in the bag, let's go on to the next thing. I would minimize the importance of the small technical breakthrough because it didn't feel that important to me mentally. Sometimes my instructor would be more excited about my moment of success than I was, which should have been a red flag. Sometimes the teacher is trying to teach you a small piece of something, and it's like holding a delicate thread while walking through a dark room. You need to work hard to stay connected to the thread, to not break it, to keep following it without losing concentration. It's a kind of trust. I have 2 examples to share with you where when I was teaching, I saw myself reflected back in my student. So the first example is fairly simple. It was a young novice rider I was teaching who had been struggling with steering. Now, we've probably all been there at some point in our life, whether we were kids or adults. Week after week, we worked on controlling the horse's line of travel, not fading sideways or falling out on the turn or ending up stuck on the wall. Finally, she completed 2 nice circles in the free space without overbending or veering off or hitting the wall. I was thrilled, and I praised her. "But the circles were too small," she wailed. I have to admit that I stopped her cold. And I said, "How can you even say that? That was good control. And please remember, you couldn't even turn a circle until this week." She had missed the moment where she had synthesized several skills. And most importantly, she missed the moment that should have been confidence building. She should have been thinking about what she did that created the success, not how it was imperfect. Remember, perfect is the enemy of better. The second example is a slightly more complicated movement. This young man and I were working on half pass. He really wanted the horse to go more sideways, but he was just learning how to do it. And he was on a different lesson horse than usual. He wasn't getting correct bend, which is kind of the whole point of half pass. So I coached him into the correct bend, but the half pass only had a shallow traverse. "Good," I said. "No, it's not good," he said. "We aren't even half passing." I said, "Well, you were in the correct bend for the first time, and that's what makes it a half pass, so it was better. The other sideways stuff you were doing was nothing." He was so caught in wanting to do the full, perfect half pass that he missed the actual lesson of the moment, which was how to develop the pieces of the half pass. I had to direct him back to what was actually the most important concept in that moment. He was missing the skill I was trying to teach him that would have allowed him to execute half pass in the future. I will never forget what one of my early dressage teachers said to me and how it rings true now. The student is responsible for their half of the learning relationship. The teacher can only teach. So I hope these stories show you how I really thought I was a pretty good student until I had to look hard at my own glass ceilings and how I was hindering some of my own progress. Performance psychology invites us to look at our own biases and our habits and ask ourselves if some of our strengths might also be weaknesses. I had to learn to do less verbal processing while on the horse, and that riding is not the time for analyzing theory. I had to change what I thought of when I thought of being a good student. I had to stop assuming that I knew what the lesson was about and what I needed, and I had to let the instructor show me what the important points were. So naturally, my journey into studying my own habits changed how I teach my students. In the spirit of being a generous instructor, I used to try to cram my students full of information. I would even tell them things that were beyond their level. If I saw that they were grasping the current lessons, I wanted to give them extra value by telling them something they might need to know 6 months from now. I'm quite sure no one ever remembered those bonus comments from their coach who was trying way too hard. I have a friend who jokes that he cannot stand to see old videos of himself teaching because he says, "I'm yammering on like I get paid by the word." When I read studies that have shown that students only hear about 30% of what an instructor says while they're doing an activity, I was very surprised. And then I thought about it from the student's point of view, about going back to all that sensory and emotional input of riding, and it made perfect sense. Being less of an encyclopedia as a student and a teacher narrowed my focus to being clear on what the real meat and potatoes were of the lesson and trying to grasp whatever those 30% of the words really are that I can absorb. Now I try to leave a little airspace in the arena for learning to happen, and I keep something in mind that I learned from an expert while on my journey of studying performance psychology. Dr. Hap Davis, a sports and performance psychologist at the Olympic level in Canada, recommends focusing on no more than 3 elements in any given coaching session, and preferably only 2. As teachers, we have to be aware of our students' level of awareness. And that concludes our first section. So we ended our second section, or our first section, talking about how the instructor will do best if they limit the number of concepts that they teach the rider, because we only can absorb really 30% of what's coming through the air to us from the instructor's voice, and that the instructor needs to be aware of the student's level of awareness, as it were. So this brings us to the second part of our discussion this evening, awareness and breath work. When I was struggling in competition, there were really 2 things that were behind the mistakes I was making in the ring. They're concepts that are pretty easy to understand, but they required a lot of practice to see benefits in real time in the dressage arena. One was awareness, which we can also call focus, and the other was emotional regulation. So here's an example, a story about focus. I remember very clearly riding a 3rd level test on my husband's Andalusian mare. The test called for a rein back on the short side. I was very focused on riding a correct corner onto the short side and on the quality of her trot, because she could get tense and rushy. I was so focused on the quality of her trot that I trotted right past the halt and rein back. Ding ding went the judge's bell, 2 points off. It's been shown that people who mentally track the steps of a process make more mistakes than people who try to flow. Flow is a special quality of awareness on the present moment. Focus precedes flow, but granular focus that's too literal actually disrupts the flow by stopping it in one place. I was so focused on one thing, the quality of the trot, that I made a mistake. I needed to be able to move my focus from the trot to the test pattern, to myself, and so on. High-performance sports psychologist Dr. Michael Gervais teaches that there are 4 pillars of awareness: thoughts, emotions, our body sensations, and the unfolding environment. Now, I feel it's important to say that practicing awareness about awareness can be quite a rabbit hole. But when you have a quiet moment, ask yourself, which of those 4 pillars might be your strong suit of awareness, and which might you need to work on? Do your emotions get so intense that you can't feel your body? Are you so distracted by the show atmosphere that you lose track of your thoughts? Do you have a loud inner voice that takes over when you try new things? In one of your future rides, try cycling through the 4 pillars: thoughts, emotions, body sensations, and the unfolding environment. Check in and see if any of them has an outsized effect on your performance, or journal about them and see which topic holds the most interest for you. In my first years competing at the FEI level, trying to establish myself as a competent rider, I put so much pressure on myself that I was an anxious mess. The anxiety was paralyzing both physically and mentally. I felt stiff in my body in the show ring, which hindered my communication with my horse, and my own thoughts were not very supportive or productive. The problem was that while I was very aware that I was anxious, I was not aware of how to fix it. A concept that I found inspiring when I first learned about it is that while focus can seem difficult to train because we all get distracted, there is a skill that is very trainable, and that is refocusing. You don't have to feel badly about losing focus. You can just practice your new skill of refocusing. We can all stop beating ourselves up about getting distracted. So my first challenge was learning more about awareness and focus and how to move through the 4 pillars of awareness without getting stuck on any single one. The second challenge was to manage my emotions. Sports psychologists recognize the importance of emotions, but mainly how very subjective they are. There is a saying, feelings are information, they are not facts. In riding, I find there's several places that emotion can hinder us. The first is that when we're practicing riding, we are gonna fail. and we're gonna have to manage how we feel about failing. We might fail and feel frustrated. We might fail and feel afraid. We might fail and feel angry. The other place that emotion can hinder us in riding is the subtle effort of emotion, or the subtle relationship of emotion to effort. When we have to try harder, the simple fact of more effort can bring up more emotion. We're short of breath, our left foot won't behave, we're getting activated, and we're not even really upset consciously. Stress hormones are entering the bloodstream and steam's starting to come out of our ears. Cus D'Amato, a famous boxing coach who is well known for saying emotions, particularly anger, are like fire. Emotions can cook your food and keep you warm, or they can burn your house down. There's actually something called the Yerkes-Dodson law, which explains how a person's level of arousal or alertness affects their performance. I have this very exciting visual aid for you. There we go.
Wow.
So hopefully you can see it. Okay, there we go.
Wow.
Thank you. I had to try hard with a ruler. Anyway, it was very, very complicated. Thank you. So here we have performance on the side, weak performance, strong performance. Then we have arousal or activation, whatever you want to call it, low to high. So we can see that if we are not alert enough, our performance is weak. And then there's a certain point on the scale where we're kind of getting alert, we're getting interested, and our performance is improving. In the middle, there is an optimal amount of alertness and stress that gives us a strong performance. But then as we start to go here, from alertness to anxiety, performance plummets. Okay. So, when arousal is too low, as if you were bored and unmotivated, the performance can suffer because we're not engaged. On the other hand, when arousal is too high, we can feel extremely anxious or stressed, and performance declines because pressure is overwhelming. People tend to perform best when they're at a moderate level of activation, where they feel challenged but still in control. The balance helps people stay focused and motivated and able to think clearly. A little bit of stress does help us perform better, but too much holds us back. How much pressure is helpful, and when does it start to harm the way that we think and perform? How can we tell how much pressure we're under, and how do we get to the sweet spot? So we have sort of this numbers scale. 1 to 3 would be sort of low alertness. 5 to 7 is the sweet spot. And then beyond 7, or 8, 9, 10, they call it getting wacky, right? Maybe you're just kind of lost, you're blacked out, you're not aware of your body, you're not there. So calm and intense is really what we're trying to develop here, but it's a skill. We want to be not overactivated yet not mellow. I think we probably know ourselves when we're on the lower end of the activation scale and we're too relaxed. As an interesting side story, I know a rider who also suffered from show nerves, and he really thought the best thing that he could do was just go for the deepest relaxation that he could find before the test. So before his test, he did his deep breathing, he let his muscles melt, felt his feet, all of those common body relaxing modalities. He rode in, he started his test, missed a mark, heard the judge's bell. So starts again, only to make a second costly mistake. One more mistake and you're eliminated. So he pulled himself together, snapped himself out of his reverie, and finished his test. He was determined to find a middle ground. Clearly, he had himself a little too low on the Yerkes-Dodson scale. Usually when it comes to performance and horse shows, being too wired or anxious is a much more common problem. And we generally know once we've gone too far and we're spinning out at the upper end of activation. So the first step to gaining some control of your activation or arousal level is to know when you're switching on, whether it's a horse show or a lesson with a new instructor or being in a new location. So you have to know yourself. What does it feel like when your body starts to amp up? Do you feel it in your stomach first? Do your hands or feet start to sweat? Do you have trembling muscles? Do you notice that your breath gets shorter? When emotions run high, whether positive or negative, we have to find a way to manage them. We have to clear the air so we can perform and focus on the present moment, because that's where riding happens and where learning happens. For 2,000 years, and probably longer, humans have been using breath work to influence their mental state, their focus, and their awareness. Sports and performance coaches now use breath work as a gold standard for helping athletes and riders, and it can help us too. It certainly made a huge difference to me. Breathing is the skill that you can teach yourself to adjust your level of activation on the Yerkes-Dodson scale and to move through the pillars of awareness to feel your own body or focus on whichever element it is that you need to focus on. So there's two things to teach yourself. One is, what kind of breath calms you down? And secondly, how many breaths would you need to go from a 9 to a 5? And the reason that we're being so specific about that is because these sports and performance coaches are assuming that you're an athlete in the heat of the moment. You can do your preparatory work of practicing your breath work and doing your research, but if you're in the ring and you're starting to become overactivated, you have to know how to calm yourself down and also how long it's going to take, right? We don't have 10 minutes to do breathing exercises. So there's two common breath exercises that I learned throughout my journey, and I use them all the time. And they are really what made a huge difference in managing my show nerves. I use them anytime I need to be calmer and more focused, even if I'm in bed having trouble falling asleep at night. So we're going to do those together now. I'll teach them to you. So one is the physiologic sigh, and the second is box breathing. Has anyone heard of these? Okay, awesome. Okay, great. Okay, really good. So first we'll go the physiologic sigh. It's a little bit easier. So the physiologic sigh is a long inhale through the nose, and then when you feel that you can't inhale any longer, you take one more sip of air, you hold it for the count of 3, or however long you can, and then exhale out through your mouth. So let's just practice a few together. So, and then one more sip, hold, and so let's do another one. Okay, so that one, that's one of them. And then the box breathing is a little more involved. I find it's not useful on the horse because it takes a lot of focus and it's a little bit longer process and you need to do a few cycles of it. But it would be tremendously useful if you're at the show, you're going to get on your horse, you're already feeling the butterflies, that kind of thing. And it's a way that you can study your own physiology in relationship to the breath work. Does that make sense? But I don't necessarily recommend this one on the horse. This is one more for generalized anxiety or nervousness.
It's good when you're driving.
It's great when you're driving. Okay, so the box breathing is a cyclic breath. This is going to sound really complicated, but it's not. The main thing about the box breathing is the longer exhale. So this is the example that I'm going to use. Sometimes people vary the numbers slightly. So you can inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for longer than 4, right? And you can draw the box in your mind if you want to. For me, it just goes up and down. It's not a box, but it doesn't matter. Okay, so you exhale for longer. So let's say 8. Then you have to hold again at the bottom. Now, you may start to feel like you're out of breath and slightly panicky, but that's a really good time to practice staying calm and noticing your own mind's reaction. Then you inhale again for 4, hold it, exhale longer, pause, and then come back in. So I'll say it, and you guys can try it. In the beginning, we'll just exhale for 6, because exhaling for 8 might feel too long. There's some sports performance guys who are like, I exhale for 32, and then I hold for 10. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Getting all of that breath out.
Yes, exactly. So this is when it takes some practice. Then again, this is again, we're talking about front-loading skills. This is when you have to teach yourself this over time. Okay, so let's inhale for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. Exhale 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold 2, 3, 4. Inhale 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. Exhale 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold 2, 3, 4. Inhale 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. Exhale, we're going to go to 6, 4, 5, 6, and we're done. Okay. Don't you love that? It is calming, and there's,
Good.
I know, it's, yeah, is it the breathing, is it the wine? Yeah, so we're going to talk about some of that. Now we're going to talk about why it works, because we can nerd out a little bit on the science, right? It's interesting. Okay. So box breathing with the longer exhale calms by activating your body's parasympathetic nervous system, which you probably have heard of. It's the rest and digest. The parasympathetic nervous system counteracts the stress, slows your heart rate, lowers your blood pressure, and signals to your brain that you're safe. It can reduce stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline and promote relaxation. The extended exhale is key because it stimulates the vagus nerve. So number 1 is vagal nerve stimulation. The prolonged exhale stimulates the vagus nerve, which is a superhighway for calming signals moving through your body. The second element is parasympathetic activation, as we said. The stimulation of the vagus nerve triggers the parasympathetic system, shifting you from a state of alertness to calm. The third element is that it slows your physiologic responses. As that parasympathetic system takes over, your heart rate slows down, your muscles relax, and your stress hormones like cortisol decrease. The last element is carbon dioxide balance. So holding your breath briefly, the pauses in the box breathing, it builds up the carbon dioxide slightly, which helps relax your nervous system and improve oxygen use. I don't know the detailed science behind that one, but the building up of the carbon dioxide mimics that old breathing into a bag when you're having a panic attack. That's really what that was about as well. So the breathing practice counteracts anxiety also simply because when we're anxious, breathing gets shallow and fast. And deep, slow breathing under control signals to your brain that the danger is gone, and it breaks that cycle of anxiety. By making the exhale longer than the inhale, you amplify these effects, essentially giving your body a strong signal to decompress. So, as you suggested, it's really important to do this breathing training outside of your riding. Don't even do it at the barn at first. Like I say, do it in traffic, do it at home, do it in the shower. Go outside on a super windy day and do it. Do it when you hear, someone playing really loud music. Pick a fight with your spouse, then do the breathing exercise. You do something that gets you amped up. Jump up and down 15 times and then see, okay, can I calm my physiological response down? And practicing it outside of competition and pressurized situations is what we call front loading the skills. And that's really what you have to do. It's too late once you're already at the show and the butterflies are taking it over and your legs are shaking. So using the breathwork was a game changer for me, managing my stress and tension in the warm-up, and for bringing my focus back to what I could control in the test. Dr. Michael Gervais says this about breathing exercises. Its purpose is to focus you. The mechanical nature keeps you on track, and the gold dust filtering down is that it relaxes you. And that concludes our second section. It's gold dust. So this final section kind of ties some things together. We're going to talk about goals, we're going to talk about reframing failure, and we're going to talk about preparation. And also control. That's a lot. But anyway, okay, we're going to start with control. So in sports psychology, there's a lot of talk about focusing what you can control. And your breath is something that you can control, which then helps you influence your physiology, your thoughts, and your emotions. This brings us to the third and final section of our talk. First, we're going to discuss control. In any kind of performance we give, we can only control ourselves. As dressage riders, we know that we cannot even totally control our horse. I know this because I've gone to a lot of shows and had a lot of things be out of my control. I have a story for you. So, I was at a spring show with a young mare, and the weather turned sour as my ride time approached. A rainstorm swept over the showgrounds as I was riding in the ring, and a nearby tent blew over. The white tent rolled end over end across a grassy area nearby the ring. My horse spooked away from it and jumped out. I was eliminated.
Just by chance.
No, it was at Morven a long time ago when they had one of the rings by the old polo fields. Oh. Yeah, that was unfortunate. A quick elimination. For those of you who don't know, if all 4 feet leave the ring at any given time, you are eliminated.
All four.
Yes. Michael Gervais, again, is fond of saying that there are only 3 things that we can train: our craft, our body, and our mind. We dressage riders have to train our horses too. I don't think he knows about that part. But maybe that falls under craft. We have to coach ourselves to know, what is in my control at this moment? Do you know what is not under your control? The judge's scores, how fancy the other horses are. Do you know what is under your control? Your ability to focus and refocus. Control is a critical component of intrinsic motivation and resiliency. When we're distracted by things that are out of our control, like other riders, the weather, the judging, we can get discouraged and overwhelmed, and we can be unable to make a plan and feel effective. So you must know, how well did I do today at focusing and refocusing? This simple question can help you become more adept at adjusting moment to moment, which is something we all have to do when we're faced with elements in situations that are pressurized. So here are some things that are under your control. I'm just going to say a bunch of them, let them wash over you and see what is interesting. Your thoughts, your actions, your attitude, your decisions, your words, your effort, your focus, your attention, and your responses to the unexpected. You are only responsible for you, not anything else. But also, the flip side of that is you are the only one who is responsible for you. That means both that you can relax about trying to control everything, but also you need to pay attention and control the things you can. Can you control your placings at regionals? No. Can you control your performance on that extended trot on the diagonal? Yes. The most powerful goals are the ones that are 100% under your control. Our goals must be concrete and solidly within our sphere of influence. Pick something in your control and work on it. When you find yourself distracted by things that are out of your control, refocus on your goal. In this sense, at horse shows, I'm not riding against the other riders. I'm riding with them. I'm riding against my most recent score, my practice at home, my own patterns of good and bad habits. Maybe my goal is just to keep breathing, to stick to the plan I made with my coach and not black out in the ring. Maybe my goal is to keep my tempo very regular throughout my test. Maybe my goal is to refocus when negative thoughts pop up in the middle of my ride. Does anyone here have an inner voice that isn't always super nice? That isn't always perfectly supportive and positive? I do. So negative thoughts, our inner voice, we have to develop a relationship with it. It's very difficult to control our inner voice, but what we can do is guide our inner voice through reframing. One of the most valuable things I learned from sports psychology was reframing. Reframing is about finding a constructive perspective instead of a self-defeating point of view. It asks us to notice and redirect our automatic inner monologue. A challenge is really an opportunity, and I don't mean that in a Pollyanna way. A simple example of reframing is to notice when your body's getting activated and your number on the Yerkes-Dodson scale is going up. Instead of thinking, oh no, here goes, I'm getting nervous, I'm gonna screw up, you can reframe the anxiety to be a sign of excitement and anticipation. You can tell yourself, oh, okay, wow, I can tell I'm getting amped up. It's a big day for me, but I'm ready and I have the tools in place. I have prepared for this. That's right. I better take some breaths or just say out loud, oh, I'm feeling the nerves. Simply stating the obvious can take a lot of power out of the moment that feels too big. Simply because it goes from feeling giant and pressurized on the inside to being a simple statement of fact on the outside. Here's an example of reframing how we see mistakes. When you make a mistake, you can get discouraged and down on yourself and think fatalistically that you're never going to get this and it's probably time to take up cross-stitching. But you can reframe your experience of the mistake and the difficulty you're facing. Here's an example. When an athlete, and if you're a rider, you're an athlete, is learning a new skill, the brain may not have the neural pathways needed to do the thing. So as the body tries a new skill and makes different mistakes, it's essentially sorting through all the possibilities for how to do it. Eventually, the body and the brain hit on the right answer, and new neural pathways are formed with myelin. Myelin is a fatty insulating sheath that wraps around nerve fibers, acting like the plastic on an electrical wire to help electrical nerve impulses travel rapidly and efficiently through the brain. So it's like the plastic on the outside of your wires. The more that you use a neural pathway, the more myelin coats it, which means that it gets faster and more efficient. That's why training is really about building habits. Skills are nothing more than sets of habits that get more and more automatic. Your brain gets more and more efficient at doing the activity once it's able to make that connection. But in the beginning, your brain may have to try a lot of different pathways before you land on the correct one. It's also important to keep in mind the perspective that sometimes learning doesn't feel good. Your brain doesn't like abnormal. The brain doesn't like new, and it doesn't always like the effort and resources that it takes to make new pathways. New myelin being laid down takes time and energy. Creating new synapses in the brain can literally make you feel dizzy, nauseous, or even tired. So a new way to look at struggling to learn something new is to reflect on the pathways you're forming in your brain and to appreciate the fact that your body and mind are sorting through a lot of possibilities on the way to the right answer. If we always want learning to feel good, we're shutting out a scientific reality about developing new skills. It can help take some of the pressure off yourself when you think about it that way. So go ahead and make lots of mistakes, but most importantly, make new mistakes. You probably just need to take a beat and try again, or consider what you may have not noticed. Try something different tomorrow. The key is not the mistake, it's what you're going to do about it. The thing to remember is that we cannot do anything to change a mistake. It's over and done. But we do have the power and efficacy to change our practice next time. Have you ever watched a video of your ride and seen something you didn't like? Something like, gosh, I'm really leaning forward. That looks terrible. I'm so embarrassed. Well, enough of that. You're going to reframe your suffering to be forward-looking and positive. You can address that leaning forward with your coach, using your refocusing and breathing skills to help your body awareness. When I learned about reframing and that mistakes are literally quite natural and not some kind of basic moral failing, it made me give myself some grace about the struggle of learning, and it helped me let go of what is done and turn the dial to something is more positive. Professional athletes work hard to be non-despondent, which that really stuck in my head. I thought it was such an interesting phrase because certainly as a horse person, when I've gotten discouraged, I have felt despondent. And the fact that all athletes struggle with this was really comforting to me. This rang true for me because we have this jokey saying in our barn that you only get to be in the fetal position for 24 hours. You may be utterly discouraged, but you have to try again tomorrow. And I'm sure you can distract yourself by hugging your horse and smelling his sweet hay smell, which is really the whole point behind all of this anyway. I've listened to a lot of interviews with professional athletes, and one in particular has stuck in my mind. It was with an Olympic gymnast, a woman in a sport, which, as you know, is extremely rigorous and demanding. It requires total dedication from a child and their entire family for years, and it usually involves retiring before you're 25. Anyway, this athlete was an Olympic gold medalist, and she still loved gymnastics passionately, but she would have bad days. Her mother always said this to her: "You can quit anytime. You do not have to do this, but you can't quit on a bad day." Since that was the rule, she said she would always go back, and she always ended up having a slightly better day. Then she would feel excited again and fall back in love with gymnastics and pursue her dream. So failure is going to happen. Our work is not about avoiding failure. It's to know what to do about it, knowing that it's over and done and that we cannot control the past. But what we can control is our preparation and our toolbox of skills. Failure is directly related to preparation. That's where the term deliberate practice comes in. I talked to plenty of riders who aren't clear on the relationship between practice and test riding. So I'm going to kind of steer in a slightly different direction here, because I think the concept of deliberate practice is really important. Deliberate practice is practice that has maybe a small goal for the session or some kind of framework, even if it's as simple as just trying to focus on one of the pillars of awareness. Or it could be something really technical, like today is half past day. But it's different from just kind of riding around and doing a little bit of this, doing a little of that, picking the horse up, letting it down, going canter, walking, just kind of noodling. It's fine if you want to have a noodling day, but you need to have more deliberate practice days than noodle days. So I'm going to kind of turn the focus a little bit here to talk now about deliberate practice and coaching. So I talk to a lot of riders who aren't clear on the relationship between practice and test riding. They aren't practicing the pieces of the test often enough or with enough precision. They aren't putting themselves on the spot at home the way a ride down the center line in front of a judge or two does. There's a saying also in our barn that's taken me years to really understand. And it is that to make the practice like the performance and the performance like the practice. Again, sounds really simple, right? Just ride your test at home, ride it at the show. But the problem is, how do you mimic the pressures of the show ring or the unpredictability of the show ring when you're at home? How do you cope with stress? How do you get yourself maybe stressed at home, stressed enough to mimic what you're going to experience in the show ring? So really, it's not about the mechanical nature of, oh, you just practice the steps and then you do them again. It's so much more than that. It's understanding what happens during the performance and preparing for those in your practice. So here are some of the hard and fast, nuts and bolts pre-flight checks I ask myself and my students before they go in a ring. Way before they go in a ring. Why did you pick this test? Do you know what the directives are? Do you know what the differences are in your test from the test above and below? Do you understand the progression of those tests in your level and why one is easier or harder, or why one or the other may be more or less suitable for you and your horse? Do you know what your job is when you're riding around the outside of the ring? What are you going to focus on when you ride into the ring? Here's the real kicker. Be honest with yourself about your stats in your daily practice. If I ask you to ride 5 shoulder ins or 5 walk to canter transitions, will they be consistent and reliable? Or will you make mistakes on 3 out of 5 of them? How reliable statistically is your performance? Rate each movement in your test for its likely success or failure. Develop a test strategy to build on the good points and not get caught off guard by weaker elements. Know where you might need to give some points away and where you can pick some up. I ask all of this because I want to set my students up for success, and I want you to set yourself up for success. Dr. Albert Bandera talked about the importance of a positive view of our own efficacy. We have to trust ourselves that we can do it. We have to be on our own side and give ourselves real tools to perform better. As Michael Gervais says, confidence comes from doing hard things, and dressage is hard, but we can be our own ally by front-loading certain skills. We can develop a mental practice and breath work that helps us recenter moment to moment in the present, stride by stride. So thank you for listening tonight to all the things that I learned on my long journey in sports psychology and improving my dressage performances. Thank you.